Let me just make the point that the national security infrastructure, the national security state, the military-industrial complex is of, by, and for Zionists. It is controlled by Wall Street as a profit center. My best guess is that in the next 2 years, we're going to see AIPAC and the Anti-Defamation League forced to register as agents of a foreign power, which is something Jack Kennedy was planning to do.
This powerful interview is being brought to you in part by Virtual Shield VPN. You know you're being tracked, profiled, and spied upon from the minute you log on. Even the big internet data providers you trust to give you access to the internet can collect, store, and sell your data to the highest bidder. So what can you do about it? You can protect yourself and your family. Virtual Shield VPN is an easy-to-use virtual private network which you can run on your phone and computers. It will make you anonymous and encrypt your traffic. You do have the right to remain private, no matter what Big Brother might want. Visit virtualshield.com/SGTreport to learn more and start enjoying your privacy for as little as $2.97 per month. I'll provide the link directly below this video. Thanks for tuning in, friends. I have a very powerful, info-packed interview for you with Robert David Steele. He's an activist, an author, and yes, he is former CIA, and we talk about that. Is he a Disnfo agent? Stay tuned. He's here now. Robert David Steele, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love your show.
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate having you on. I want to ask you a couple of things, but first I want to make people aware of your books. Robert David Steele is the author of False Flag Attacks, a Tool of the Deep State, The Soft Coup Collapses, Blackmail Revealed, What Next? World War III has started, the public against the deep state, and Pedophilia and Empire, Satan, Sodomy, and the Deep State. All available on Amazon and all part of Robert David Steele's Trump Revolution series. His website is robertdavidsteele.com. And Robert, let me just ask you before we get started. There are some pundits in the alt media on YouTube who I don't really follow closely, but I've heard some people say that you are a Disnfo agent and once CIA, always CIA, and anybody that interviews you must also be considered a Disnfo agent. How do you react to those charges?
Well, let me answer your question. I'll react to those charges, but first, please let me correct the record. The book, Pedophilia and Empire, Satan, Sodomy, and the Deep State, is actually being written by West Point graduate Joaquim Hagopian. I wrote the foreword to that book. And that book is free online at tinyurl/pedo empire. The other books that you mentioned are Kindles. I actually have 8 hard copy books on intelligence and intelligence reform. And people can go to robertdavidsteele.com and pretty much see everything I've ever written in my life for free. Now, as to once CIA, always CIA. The CIA is a government bureaucracy. When you retire or you separate, it's permanent unless you become what's called an annuitant, who is then employed by the agency while still collecting retirement. In my case, I'm not collecting retirement from any government agency, although I have over 25 years. It's split up across the Marine Corps active duty, Marine Corps civil service, and CIA 9 years. And I have to go back into government in order to consolidate all of my retirement. So right now, I'm not receiving any money at all from the U.S. government, not even Social Security. I am still under a lifetime secrecy agreement with CIA, and selected books go to the CIA Publications Review Board, which has always been extremely professional. I have very high praise for the CIA Publications Review Board, whose sole purpose in life is to ensure that no classified information inadvertently gets into a book. They are not monsters who are trying to edit the narrative. They are absolutely wonderful people. I would say finally, in my answer to your question, is that the problem with people who accuse me of being a disinformation agent or still working for the CIA is they don't read. Because anybody who read would know that I've written 8 books that say we need to cut the CIA and the rest of the secret intelligence community down by 70%. And I am the world's greatest champion for open source intelligence. And my soundbite in the 1990s was, don't send a spy where a schoolboy can go. And the reason CIA has fought me for 40 years, which anybody with a brain would know if they could read, is because open source intelligence can answer 95% or so of all of the questions from all clients, the president, the cabinet, major military commanders, and so forth, for perhaps 5% of what we spend now on secret intelligence. And I will end by saying General Tony Zinni has said very clearly, when he was commander of CENTCOM, he got 4%, quote, at best, end quote, of what he needed to know from the secret intelligence community. The reality is I'm the single most vocal champion for intelligence reform that would reorient it away from covert action toward decision support, away from secrecy toward open source, and away from supporting Wall Street and the 1% toward supporting the 99% with true cost economics and holistic analytics that would eradicate the 50% waste and the 90% corruption that is endemic in our system. So if people don't have the intelligence and the integrity to actually go read everything I've written, then they're going to spout this line. Or, of course, they're a paid troll for the Anti-Defamation League, a volunteer troll for the Southern Poverty Law Center, or a paid troll for Media Matters, which is its own toxic environment.
Well, thank you for that. And I should make one correction. I got the list of Kindles there off of Amazon. And, these days, the difference between a Kindle and a hardcover book is less and less. People love to listen to audio, but Pedophilia and Empire, Satan, Sodomy, and the Deep State does show you as author. So thanks for correcting that. And,
well, it's only for the forward. There's
sure.
17 chapters that have been published if you look up the entire collection, and they show Joaquin Hagopian as the author. So no worries on that. And also, let me point out that with 2 or 3 exceptions, all of my Kindles are really more like white papers rather than books. The exceptions include the False Flag collection that you talk about, and also the Accidental President, and a couple of others. But out of the 30 or so Kindles in my Trump Revolution series, I'd say roughly 25 to 26 are 99-cent papers. And let me also emphasize, because I never pimp my books for sale, everything I have published is available free online at phi-beta-iota.net. Just look for the title at phi-beta-iota.net and you get the free version. The Kindle stuff is to reach people who love Kindle and who don't mind paying 99 cents, of which I get 1/3. Amazon keeps 2/3 of everything.
Well, let me also say that there's a couple other books here that I think speak to who you are and what you're willing to talk about, one of which is The Zionist Vision is Rooted in 5 Big Lies and 4 Big Thefts, and the other, Peace in the Middle East, Denuclearizing Israel, Restoring Palestine, and More. Do you want to talk a little bit about Donald Trump's long game? Because you and I both know that many of his detractors, even in the alt-right space or in the conservative space or on YouTube, will say, he's obviously an avowed Zionist, and anybody that thinks that he's any different than Hillary Clinton is just delusional, to which I say, if Hillary Clinton would have gotten into the White House, we would have been experiencing, as Q has said, hell on earth right now. I firmly believe that. So I see our cup as very much half full. How do you answer the charge that Trump is a Zionist and nothing will change?
I've written a lot on this topic, and I'd really be pleased if people wanted to go to robertdavidsteele.com and click on the publications page and or the interviews page, and they can see where I've gone with all of this. Let me say first, I don't think the cup is half full. I think the cup is 2/3 to 3/4 full. This week, not only are we seeing the unification of the Koreas and their eventual denuclearization and the eventual demilitarization of the south of the Koreas, which is a story that I broke on the 4th of March in the American Herald Tribune after speaking with the Japanese princess that is the Japanese liaison for the royal family to the North Korean leadership. I broke this story. And when I broke the story, I was called a lunatic. Now, of course, everyone sees that it's going on. And when Trump canceled the summit, I said, don't worry, this is all theatrics. It's on. Nothing's changed. Well, now everyone sees that I was right. What's interesting to me is that the Trump long game, and I'll come back to the Zionist thing in a minute, the Trump long game is rooted in Trump's common sense and in the special relationship between Trump, Xi Jinping in China, and Vladimir Putin in Russia, which is very much equivalent to the relationship that Jack Kennedy had with Nikita Khrushchev, where they both agreed that the worst enemies of peace were their own generals. The American generals had no fear of a nuclear war with Russia, and the same was true of the Russian generals.
And in fact, they
So
were trying to foster that. They were actually trying
yes,
to encourage
exactly,
it. And what saved us from World War III back during the Cuban Missile Crisis, as you well know, I don't know how many of the listeners know this, is Jack Kennedy picked up the phone and spoke with Khrushchev. He really saved us from destruction.
That's half of it. That's half of it. The other thing that saved us from World War III was a specific Soviet captain refusing an order to fire on a U.S. ship that was enforcing the blockade. Let me just make the point that the national security infrastructure, the national security state, the military-industrial complex is of, by, and for Zionists. It is controlled by Wall Street as a profit center. General Smedley Butler, the most decorated Marine officer in his time, wrote an anti-war book called War is a Racket. Okay. Bottom line here is that Trump is a street fighter. He came up through the New York ranks. He absolutely was bailed out by Russian Jews at some point. He absolutely has a daughter that is married to a Zionist. But I think that what has changed in Jared Kushner's life in the last 6 months is that he has realized that if he doesn't stick with Trump and be loyal to Trump, he's toast. And so Netanyahu, I think, has lost Jared Kushner as a bishop or a knight or a castle chess piece in the White House. I think Jared Kushner right now is 110% loyal to Donald Trump, and that is a major change in the Zionist vision of how this was all going to play out. Also, Ben Fulford has quoted Pentagon sources, and I have other sources that have said that Trump's long game is about peace in the Middle East, starting with the denuclearization of Israel. So I'm absolutely certain that in Trump's second term, we will not only denuclearize Israel by stopping all U.S. financial support for Israel and for Saudi Arabia, but we will also begin reducing the military-industrial complex. What most people don't know is that Trump used the 2 attacks against Saudi Arabia, both of which were coordinated in advance with Putin and Assad. He used them to measure the U.S. military-industrial complex. It was not lost on our president that 1/3 of Raytheon's Tomahawk missiles did not work as advertised. 1/3. It's not lost on the president that the USS Donald Cook was totally immobilized by a single Russian electronic warfare airplane, which then buzzed the destroyer 12 times. An unarmed airplane buzzed the destroyer 12 times. The destroyer was completely neutralized. Trump, I think, knows what the Iranians and the Russians have figured out, that they cannot sink a U.S. carrier without starting World War III, but they can shut down all of the electronics of a U.S. carrier without starting World War III. And if Trump were to do something truly insane toward war in the Middle East, I think that's the next big eye-opener. So bottom line for me is I've written a very famous article. It's being widely read worldwide. It's called Zionism in America, 7 Strikes and Counting. The strike count is now up to 13. My best guess is that in the next 2 years, we're going to see AIPAC and the Anti-Defamation League forced to register as agents of a foreign power, which is something Jack Kennedy was planning to do. They're not only going to be forced to register as agents of a foreign power, but if Trump ever gets an attorney general with balls, they are also going to be under investigation under the racketeering laws and under the tax evasion laws, because they have 10 to 20,000 nonprofit organizations, many with nondescript names, that are being used to suck money out of the American public and channel it to Israel under false pretenses.
Well, that would be absolutely wonderful, and I'd like to see George Soros himself targeted for his activities, which are anti-American, pro-globalist. They're anti-human, to be honest with you, and maybe this is a good time to bridge over to the censorship we're seeing of the truth media on YouTube and otherwise. You noted in an email to me that ADL is the preferred censor for YouTube. I might add the SPLC as being one of the gatekeepers, too, allowed to flag videos they don't agree with. Your thoughts on the censorship we're seeing on YouTube, and I'd add to the conversation here that David Seaman just filed a lawsuit against the Daily Beast. So more and more of us are standing up to fight the good fight, but we're being targeted ruthlessly. One more strike from YouTube, unwarranted strike, and they won't tell me why, and they will terminate my channel. It really is a David versus Goliath story at this point.
Well, it is, but there's also a silver lining. Let me say first that when Cynthia McKinney and I started the hashtag Unrigged campaign for election reform, we made it clear that it was going to be about America first and people, not parties. The Zionists clearly understood that this was a threat. There's no more formidable former congressperson against the Zionists than Cynthia McKinney. Dr. Cynthia McKinney, I might add. She has a doctorate, a PhD in leadership, and she's teaching at the Master of Business Administration level. So when Cynthia and I pulled out hashtag Unrigged, we were attacked 6 different ways by what I'm calling hashtag Google Gestapo. And I document the 6 attacks in 90 days in my article that was published in the American Herald Tribune. And the tiny URL for that is tinyurl.com/Google Gestapo. I also have another tiny URL /Google Gestapo references. Google Gestapo is not just YouTube and Google, its parent, which is Google was manipulating search results and trends and polls and everything during the election. The only people that hacked the American election were the British, the Clintons, and the social media that is under the control of the Zionists. Hashtag Google Gestapo, in my view, includes Amazon, which is banning books, reviewers, and reviews, Facebook, Google, Meetup, which is sponsoring with the Anti-Defamation League. Meetup is co-sponsoring with waived fees, which is an undeclared illegal campaign contribution, 1,087 hashtag resist meetups. Yet they canceled the $77,000 paid hashtag Unrigged meetup. We had a meetup in every single one of the 435 congressional districts. They canceled us without due process. I mean, it's clear that Meetup is part of Google Gestapo and is under Zionist ADL control. At the same time, you have Twitter and YouTube, and I would add Wikipedia, which, to take one small example, Bill Binney and I are among the rock stars, if you will, from the intelligence world that have called out John Brennan as a liar and Mike Hayden as a liar and Jim Clapper as a liar on this whole issue of the Russians hacked the election. That's absolute crap. Well, in Wikipedia, they say that Bill Binney saying that puts him on the conspiracy fringe side of the story. So I believe Wikipedia is controlled by the Zionists as well. And now the silver lining. I'm waiting to hear if I'm going to get funding from a major benefactor this coming week. But I plan to fund a legal summit and a technical summit whose goal is to bring everybody together who wants to sue any element of hashtag Google Gestapo and create a massive class action lawsuit against all of them, not only for violation of Title VII anti-discrimination, but in the case of some of them, for their violation of all of the regulations and laws pertaining to common carriers and people who provide services of public concern. It's clearly established that the First Amendment trumps private property. And these people, notably Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, have all made assertions about being town halls and open to all points of view and so forth. My personal opinion is that no social media enterprise should ever delete a channel without a court order. Anything less than a court order is arbitrary, capricious, and torturous interference, and is also subject to claims for damages to your income. I think YouTube, and I said this to Brendan Sullivan in an email. I'm fortunate enough to know him and have his email. I said, hey, you're going to run up a lot of billable hours here, but in the end, these people are going to lose. So we have a new strategy called Sue and Screw. The sue part of it is bringing together 10,000 plaintiffs in an organized way and absolutely nailing these people for their massive violations of the law. They're not going to get away with this. And what I'm finding is that some astonishingly important names are timid. They're afraid of engaging. They don't have the fortitude to actually get into a federal lawsuit, even if it's on a contingency basis with no money down. So I'm finding that people are showing their true colors, and they're not willing to go the distance in using the federal law system as it should be used to hold people like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter accountable. But there are enough of us filing lawsuits so that I think it's going to work in the end. The second part of my strategy is the screw part, which is to replace a complete end-to-end, create a complete end-to-end social media ecology, probably built around BitChute, which uses BitTorrent and does not need data centers. So the concept here is to expand BitChute and have it include text messages, emails, file sharing. There's a new search engine. And so we're just going to put all the pieces together, and we're going to make it a two-way system with massive visualization capabilities, such that, for example, President Trump could forget about Twitter and send out a trumpet to 200 million voters, all of whom could respond to President Trump in a way that can be visualized on a presidential dashboard, so that President Trump can see what the American public is saying on any given issue by any given demographic in any given congressional district. This will give him more power over Congress than any president has had in memory.
You know, I absolutely love the term Google Gestapo. Did you coin that?
I did. Hashtag Google Gestapo. And I have to say, there have been some good things that Google has done, but I know Larry Page personally. We're members of the same Silicon Valley Hackers Conference. Larry is a great engineer with no ethics. And his term of doing no evil is absolutely dishonored, just the way CIA dishonors its motto, you shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free. Google has become very, very evil. And Google and Amazon, interestingly, are old stuff. They're based on data centers that are unsupportable. I had lunch with Bill Binney yesterday, and we talked about the internet after next, or the autonomous internet. It will not have data centers. That's what Amazon and Google have not been willing and able to move beyond.
You know, I've wondered about that. If you imagine the size of these server farms to store all of these YouTube videos people are uploading, which is growing exponentially by the day, it's mind-boggling. I'm not sure how they've built such a flawless platform that actually plays videos in real time when you click play, and they even support the live streaming. It's a mind-boggler, but Google Gestapo is very apt. And I want to ask you this as we're having this conversation. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, Google does do blatantly evil things like firing engineer James Damore for writing a white paper which was not racist or bigoted against women in any way. And of course, James Damore wins that battle in the court of public opinion, because right now we are undergoing ideological warfare. And I want to give you an example of that. As we're having this conversation today, Robert, we have Robert De Niro, and I'm going to quote him, shouting at the Tony Awards and getting a standing ovation for saying the following.
I'm going to say one thing. Fuck Trump.
I see the forces in play as literally at this point good versus evil, because if you take a look at Hollywood, Weinstein, spirit cooking, if you take a look at the messages that continue to come from these people, they are so ideologically polarized and against truth that it really defies my ability to understand it at this point. Because the alternative to Donald Trump was a literal witch, a satanic woman involved, complicit in the murders of countless millions of people, not even to mention the Clinton body count in Arkansas. How do you reconcile what we see coming out of Hollywood on a daily basis, despite the pure evil that we all know about? Harvey Weinstein, Nixium, Keith Raniere, Allison Mack, child sex trafficking, spirit cooking. How in the world do you reconcile Robert De Niro saying,
fuck Trump?
First off, let's take Trump at multiple levels, okay? I mean, and let's start with the raccoon eyes and the orange face, and go on to his cheating on his wife when she was pregnant. And I mean, he's done a lot of things that are just plain horrible from a personal point of view. However, at the strategic level, Donald Trump is a disruptor who makes his own decisions, who is not buying into all of the baloney. For example, on the Koreas, let me point out to your listener that Colin Powell achieved peace with Korea and got North Korea to agree to all of the requirements the United States was making. And he brought this back to Dick Cheney as vice president. Said Cheney said, I don't want that. And Cheney levied on Powell more onerous requirements that destroyed the North Korean peace deal that Colin Powell had negotiated. Now, Powell gave up his integrity twice. That was the first time. He should have gone to Congress and said the vice president has just destroyed the North Korean peace deal, and he didn't do that. The second time he gave it up was when he knowingly lied to the United Nations about the 9/11 attacks, which were actually orchestrated by Dick Cheney, planned by the Zionists, logistically supported by Saudi Arabia, with rogue elements of the FBI and the CIA, including George Tenet as director of the CIA, including Robert Mueller in the immediate aftermath as director of the FBI, covering up for Dick Cheney. And so Trump, while people mock him, he's actually doing some extraordinary things. The Koreas is the most obvious example on the foreign policy front. I think on the domestic front, people are about to get a wake-up call. My personal belief, based on multiple sources from Japan to London, is that Trump used the 30,000 indictments to neutralize 90% of the deep state, the 1%, and he has negotiated the return of over $15 trillion out of the $23 trillion and more that was stolen by the banks. Donald Trump has single-handedly brought the deep state to a standstill. And as far as De Niro goes, great actor, no brain. He really, and I have people that I meet here in Oakton, Virginia, that are the same way. I mean, they can't think straight when they're thinking about Trump. They just don't get that he is a disruptor, and that for all of his tiny, small personal flaws, he is a giant on the world stage, in part because he's refusing to listen to his corrupt bureaucracy that is owned by the Zionists. The Department of State in particular is a Zionist-controlled organization. And he has established a personal rapport with General Secretary Xi Jinping from China and President Vladimir Putin from Russia. And so Trump, those three guys rule the world. And those three guys understand that their staffs are all being bribed or blackmailed to actually not be useful. And this is particularly true in the United States, less so in China and somewhere in between in Russia. So Trump has a whole bunch of things going for him, including the fact that flyover country, the real Americans who do real work, has absolutely decided that Washington and the two-party tyranny are a cesspool that can be bypassed. Now, the only thing Trump hasn't done, which I really would like him to do, and your listeners can find my 3 ideas for Trump's long-term game at tinyurl/Trump, the number 2, and then Longview. I really believe that Trump needs to establish an election reform act that gives libertarians and Greens and independents a fair shake. And I said this when I spoke to Rolling Thunder in front of the Lincoln Memorial, which was a highlight in my life, the chance to do this Forrest Gump thing in front of the Lincoln Memorial, in front of thousands of people. That was fantastic. We have to give a fair shake to the small parties and the independents at the same time that we have to restore the conservative nature of the Republican Party, and we have to help the Sandinistas take over the Democratic Party. Because the Democratic and Republican parties today are totally corrupt. They're agents of the deep state. They are not at all interested in serving the public interest. So my bottom line on Trump is he's doing the right things in the right way, and people simply don't get it. For example, all that stuff about canceling the summit and all of that, that was just theater to tie the media and the neoconservatives in knots. The summit is taking place on schedule. Trump has a public game and a private game. He has a game with Xi and Putin. He has a game with other leaders who he absolutely does not trust, such as Merkel and Macron in France. Those are agents of the deep state. And then he has a lower game. What he doesn't have right now is a game with the 99%. And that's what I'd like to see him do with veterans, 22 million veterans, a truth channel, and an election reform act that mobilizes 100 million eligible voters who have now dropped out because they know the system is rigged. So that's the rig. That's the trifecta for Trump on the 99% side. Veterans, a truth channel, and an election reform act.
All right, well, let's stay on this track for just a second more. And guys, we will round out the conversation by talking about the global financial reset. Robert, I do love the fact that Trump is an intimidating figure on the global stage, and he will literally stare down people like Macron, Merkel, and that dancing fool from Canada and intimidate them. And it's, I think, because he is on the side of truth. He is not representing the globalist interests necessarily at the G7 or on the world stage. At least that's my take. And again, that's why I see our cup as half full. But if we stay on the track of waking up the 99%, let's talk about Nixium, the arrest of Keith Raniere and Allison Mack, the recent quote-unquote suicide of Anthony Bourdain, which I don't necessarily believe was a suicide.
Let me interrupt you.
Sure.
Let me interrupt you. 11 suicides, all allegedly by hanging with a scarf from a doorknob.
Well, and that's what I wanted to get to. I wanted to get to the idea that we can wake up even the most ideological zealots on the left by informing them about the fact that spirit cooking and the satanic ritual abuse that's going on in Hollywood and has been going on for decades is very, very real. And many of these people that they look to, these spokespeople themselves, are involved in this stuff. I don't know if you've seen the Instagram pictures of from Anthony Bourdain and his girlfriend Asia, but she herself is known as a white witch. She herself had posted some very disturbing images, and it leads one to wonder what Anthony Bourdain found himself involved in, and was he suicided as opposed to having committed suicide? I think you and I probably both know what the answer is.
Let me say with real clarity that anybody who is found hanging from a doorknob was murdered. They did not commit suicide hanging from a doorknob. And I spoke to one of my medical colleagues, and they said basically the way this works is someone is very gently strangled with no marks to cut off the blood going from to the head. That makes the person unconscious. And then at that point, you tie them with a scarf to the doorknob, and the doorknob finishes the job, but they're unconscious before they actually hang from the doorknob. I think these are all murders. I think that the method of murder is being used as a signal to people who are coming out against not just pedophiles, which is the wrong word, pedopredator is a better word, but they're also murderous pedophiles. A lot of these elites in both the Republican and Democratic parties and banking and celebrities and so forth, they're participating in the torture and murder of children, as well as the harvesting of the blood and the body parts of children, as well as eating fetuses. This is all real evil. Let me point out to your listeners that I wrote a letter to James Comey, delivered by certified mail, asking him to indict Hillary Clinton, investigate and then indict Hillary Clinton for pedophilia, treason, charity fraud, and electoral fraud. She stole 13 primaries from Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders deserves no further respect from the Sandinistas because he was complicit after the fact in accepting her thefts. Otherwise, he would have been the Democratic nominee. So bottom line here is that Pizzagate, and a shout out to David Seaman and Liz Crokin and others like you who have done such a good job in this area, Pizzagate was a wake up for the public. Once the public is fully aware of pedophilia, we've just published a number of videos. The International Tribunal for Natural Justice has just published a number of videos from our hearings in London in mid-April. Once the public understands that governments have been tolerating murderous pedophilia, 8 million children a year disappearing, with an average lifespan of 2 years after they're ingested into the system. This is going to cause the publics to realize that they need to abolish all of their governments and start over. And let me just make one other point on the French leaders, Merkel and Macron particularly. In the Barcelona agreements, the Arab leaders bribed the European leaders to accept an unlimited flow of unemployed Muslims into Europe in order to reduce pressure on the Arab leaders who were busy repressing their publics and looting their countries. The dirty little secret of the European leaders and the Canadian leader that Donald Trump has been confronting is they've all been bribed and he has not.
Well, and that's the good news, folks. I mean, I do believe firmly that our cup is half full, and anybody that says that that's not the case is, I don't think, being intellectually honest, and is probably more in line with the thinking of those on the left coming out of Hollywood that would say F Trump. Why don't we do this, David? Why don't we round out the conversation with discussion of the global financial reset? Now, as you know, I've shared in many of my videos over the past couple of years that image from the 1988 cover of the Rothschild Economist magazine showing a phoenix rising from a burning pile of fiat dollars with a gold medallion around its neck. And the title of that article was "Get Ready for a Global Currency," I believe it said. Get ready for a world currency. You wrote to me in an email, "Global financial reset, Rothschild retiring, Pope resigning, but the Shabbat supremacist cult is still holding out." How do you see the global financial reset unfolding here in 2018 and beyond?
What I am being told is that Trump is pumping $1 trillion into the U.S. economy, but he's doing it from the bottom up. Sometime in the next week to 10 days, I expect people to start noticing that there are essentially between 1,500 and 15,000. I cannot remember which number is correct because I received a briefing on this a few weeks back. But basically 1,500 people, let's just say 1,500 people, let's say 3 in each congressional district, each spending $1 billion. And they have only 2 orders. Number 1, hire people into full-time jobs with full benefits. And number 2, build new stuff, rent nothing. Imagine the impact of that on the U.S. economy between now and November. And then imagine the combination. If Trump has indeed, I have no direct knowledge, but I'm being told this by others. If Trump has indeed gotten $15 to $20 trillion back from the banks, that wipes out the national debt. That moves the United States toward being a creditor nation at the same time that Trump has achieved full energy independence. We're now exporting. We're no longer dependent on the Saudis for oil. Now imagine if Trump brings in a gold-backed dollar and negotiates other major concessions in trade and so forth. I really am beginning to see a huge strategic advance for the United States of America, both domestically and internationally. And it's all centered on prioritizing the interests of the public rather than the interests of the banks.
Well, that's 100% right. Our economy has been looted by the banks, and you know, because of the 2008 TARP bailouts, the banks benefited when they crashed the system. The very system they brought down, they benefited from. And, you know, here we have a president saying, and I'll quote this tweet from real Donald Trump. Now, guys, contrast his Twitter behavior to that of Hillary Clinton. This is a president who is a public president. This is a president who wants to speak directly to the people, and it certainly pains the Mockingbird mainstream horror media, I'll tell you that. But he wrote this on the 11th of June. Germany pays 1%, slowly, of GDP towards NATO, while we pay 4% of a much larger GDP. Does anybody believe that makes sense? We protect Europe, which is good, at great financial loss, and then get unfairly clobbered on trade. Change is coming. And he followed that up with, sorry, we cannot let our friends or enemies take advantage of us on trade anymore. We must put the American worker first. Guys, if you don't see our cup as half full, again, just imagine the pure evil and hell on earth we would be living through right now if the Wicked Witch was in the White House. Robert David Steele, I'll leave you the final word.
Well, let me say I think Trump's instincts were right. We need to abolish NATO. We actually also need to abolish the United Nations and throw them out of New York. That real estate can be put to better use. For example, the World Brain Institute. I believe that no matter what happens with Trump, he has opened the door for the public to get back into the public business. And the only thing that concerns me is that Trump might decide not to do a second term. I certainly hope not, because Mike Pence is a deep state president. He is a Hillary Clinton lookalike in Republican clothing. So I'm betting on Trump. I'm hoping for Trump. But if Trump decides to get out of the presidency, we do have a plan B backed up by no fewer than 5 billionaires. And Pence will not ever be considered seriously as president of the United States of America.
Well, let me ask you this then before we go. Why do you suppose Donald Trump selected Pence as his vice president as opposed to a Rand Paul or any number of other better choices?
I think Trump took the advice of Roger Stone and Paul Manafort, and it was the correct advice. Despite the fact that Pence had a private email server similar to Hillary Clinton's, despite the fact that he has accusations against him which have not been properly investigated with respect to both fraud and pedophilia, I think he helped Trump win. I don't think he's the right person going forward. I actually tried to put Cynthia McKinney forward. Because the most powerful thing that McKinney and I had was I was the alt-right white guy and she a former spy, and she was the alt-left black woman, former congresswoman. It was a very powerful combination. I would like to serve Trump as an intelligence officer. He doesn't have professional intelligence officers giving him decision support on all threats, all policies, all costs right now. What he has is posturers who are assassinating thousands of people with drone strikes and still doing torture and rendition, and basically doing regime change that is an act of war without the approval of Congress. And NSA is spying on and blackmailing congresspeople. So Trump needs to flush the intelligence community. He needs a new vice president. I hope he does not make the mistake of bringing in Nikki the Squeeze Haley. The woman is a bimbo. She has absolutely no concept of reality. But Trump can do better in the vice presidency. He can also do better with the national security advisor. To his credit, I think he has been extremely clever about keeping his enemy close. And the appointments he made from day one have been about avoiding assassination and playing all the factions against each other while he did his own thing. I'm quite convinced he's having conversations with Putin and Xi and maybe even Rouhani in Iran that nobody else is aware of.
You know, before we go, let me just say I have so much esteem for Cynthia McKinney. And, you know, that clip of her standing up to Rumsfeld and grilling him about DynCorp just merely being put in the penalty box, as Rumsfeld quoted, the penalty box for human trafficking violations, for being involved in human trafficking, which she so bravely pointed out, grilling him on the record. Cynthia McKinney will go down in history as one of my favorite, most patriotic, most truth-telling representatives in at least my lifetime. So a shout out to Cynthia McKinney and to you, Robert David Steele. I've really appreciated this conversation. Would you tell people how they can find you and follow your work?
Well, robertdavidsteele.com is my personal website. Everything I've written is there, free online, with the exception of the open source manifesto, which is available in pieces. PhiBetaIota.net is the blog, and it's free with no ads ever. And of course, I'm grateful for donations. I've been technically unemployed since the 1st of January 2008, but I eke out a living doing what I think needs to be done without regard for money.
Well, God bless you. And are you on Patreon? Have you started a Patreon account?
I don't like Patreon, but I'm at paypal.me/EarthIntel. All donations are tax deductible and go to Earth Intel through paypal.me. And then if I can, I pull out, over the course of a year, as much as $20,000, sometimes a little bit more. But by and large, most of the money goes to the nonprofit, and it's 3 projects: Truth Channel, #Unrigged for election reform, and supporting the Pedophilia Commission. Those are the 3 things I spend my life on.
Well, it was a real pleasure to meet you. Again, thank you for reaching out to me after my second strike on YouTube. I have been in discussions with others behind the scenes about how to move forward, perhaps with a lawsuit against Google and YouTube, and I want people to understand that you're one of the people making that possible, so thank you for that. And last but not least, would you be willing to come on once every 6 or 8 weeks for an update?
Oh, absolutely. I would never refuse an invitation from you. I really respect what you do very much.
Well, thank you so very much. I appreciate your kind words. I appreciate your time, and back at you. Guys, our guest has been Robert David Steele. You can also follow him at robertdavidsteele.com. Former CIA officer, activist, and author. Robert, thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And guys, thanks so much for tuning in. You can catch us for real news 24/7 at SGTreport.com, thelibertymill.com, and thephaser.com.
The sad truth is that human trafficking is a real problem plaguing each and every community here in the United States. Enough is enough.